Welcome to the Building Web3 podcast. Today, my good friend Josh. He's the CEO and founder of Irys. Before we get too deep into Irys, give us a brief background on yourself. How'd you get into this Web3 world?
Hey, yeah. So I'm Josh, founder CEO of Irys. I got into crypto about 4.5 years ago. Before then, I was actually at university. I was studying computer science in the UK, just outside of London, and pretty organically discovered crypto and ended up kind of getting very deep into the tech kind of blockchain purist side. And then over time started to kind of just delve deeper and grow in the space as everyone does. And it was during COVID as well. It kind of got to the point where it was COVID and I was at university and it was incredibly boring. So I was just kind of doing a bunch of research and ended up ultimately doing kind of two things at once. One, I was contributing to essentially these open source database internals. So basically the inside of databases. And then also I was going very deep into these kind of data chains, which is kind of the RWeaves, Filecoin, storage, Sears, Cheers, towards the end of 2020. And that's kind of where I kind of rapidly onboarded to crypto, because although databases and data chains aren't kind of one-to-one, there are definitely a lot of similarities, at least from a technical architectural standpoint. And yeah, those things kind of just combined together, and I just started focusing on the data chain space. And I then started Irys in early 2021 within the RWeave ecosystem, RWeave being the permanent storage, permanent data chain. And the problem that we were solving back then was, how do we, RWeave is essentially this very unscalable technology. It's very cool, but didn't scale much. It was very difficult to use. And the question for us was, how do we kind of make this scalable? How do we make it easy for developers to use, therefore accelerating adoption for the broader ecosystem? So that's what initially Irys was. Back in early 2021, we took RWeave from doing about 10,000 transactions a day to about 15 million a day. And then we onboarded, and then we made the decision that we wanted to launch our own L1 just under a year ago, and that's what we announced now a couple of months ago, and that's Irys is the first programmable data chain. It's a long intro. There we go.
No, I like it. I like it. Tell us, for people that are unfamiliar, what is a data chain? What kind of value does it provide to the ecosystem?
Yeah, so a data chain very simply is a blockchain that is optimized to store information, or essentially just optimized for storage. So the problem is kind of how do these blockchains that are typically very kind of restricted environments, they can't store a lot of data. When you think about something like Ethereum or Bitcoin, how do we enable a blockchain to have all of its traditional properties, but also enable it to scale to store petabytes or millions and millions and millions of terabytes essentially? And that's kind of the core problem that data chains look to solve.
So talk to us a little bit about like how you guys kind of solve this. Like, let's say we're building a DApp, right? And let's talk about how someone might use a data chain. Would they use this as they would use something like a AWS storage, or like talk to us about how people use a data chain in practice.
Yeah. So to give a little bit more of a nuanced answer, it does broadly depend on what kind of data chain you're using. There are some kind of data, and just to kind of differentiate it, there are some data chains that are just pure kind of just storing data. So if you think about something like RWeave, which is essentially just storing data permanently, a one-time fee, and then in 100 years' time, it should still be around. That's kind of a pure storage data chain. And then Filecoin up to recently was just a pure kind of temporary storage chain. Recently kind of integrated its VM, but and then the kind of progression, this is where Irys kind of differentiates, is as a programmable data chain, which is actually how do you build whole web services? How do you build whole applications on these layers as opposed to just storing data? So that's the broad differentiation. I will answer the original question, which is how do people practically use this thing? So if you're just storing data, it's very much the user experience is a little bit different to something like an AWS S3, but it's very much that functional similarity where you are just trying to store information, and some applications do kind of a temporary form of data, which is very traditional S3, or some applications are doing permanent data. So, and to differentiate what applications are doing what, I would say like most applications use temporary data in some way, and then permanent data. Some of those applications are things like NFTs. So the original kind of uprise of RWeave and permanent data was in the NFT era in 2021, sorry. And moving from there are a bunch of different infrastructures that essentially, whether it's bridges, oracles, etc., that essentially use data chains to store a lot of their application data in a permanent way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And talk to us a little bit about some of the features that people can kind of expect on Irys, and kind of just what you guys are bringing to the market. Because you talked about working for other data chains or contributing to other data chains, and they kind of were missing some features.
Yeah. So the core idea of all data chains is storing information, but where it really differentiates is from a storage standpoint is okay, like functionally what's enabled. So RWeave essentially enables permanent data, Filecoin enables this temporary data. Irys's goal was how do we actually serve kind of all applications? So how do we enable both temporary and permanent data within a single kind of unified platform? And then the feature above that, if you're thinking like a cake, we have the data layer at the bottom. The layer above is essentially some kind of execution or Irys VM essentially, which enables traditional kind of DeFi tokens, etc. kind of behavior within smart contracts, but also enables you to interact with the data that's in the data layer within the smart contracts as well. So you can read from the data layer and write back to it as well. That's kind of like the core feature set of what Irys enables, especially in differentiation to previous data chains.
And then talk to us a little bit about like the state of Irys, like where are you guys at in the product development cycle? Is there like a test net, or are you guys on like an alpha test net or main net? Talk to us about where you guys are at.
Yeah, so it's in alpha testnet, and really to translate what that means in practice is we have a network and we have people building on it. It's just a very select number of people, and a lot of the information isn't public. In terms of where we're going to be going soon, public testnet is soonish, and then mainnet will be kind of sometime. I'll give the general timeline sometime next year. So those are really the two big milestones that we're working towards.
Nice, very exciting. And talk to us a little bit about like what companies, or like you guys talked about having kind of like select users building on it initially, like who, like is there a specific vertical you guys are focusing on, like DeFi, or is it more like, hey, like who are the users?
Yeah, so we definitely have a very broad set of users. So I'd say, first of all, to categorize how people use Irys, there are people who are just storing data, and then there are people who are building whole protocols. So when it comes to storing data, it is a very broad range. We have people in the AI space storing AI models. We have people in deep-in networks, within deep-in world, storing the data that those networks or the individuals on those networks generate. And we also have consumer applications, whether it's actual social, like Web3 social apps, or a lot of NFT related data as well. We serve and we store. So that's within kind of the pure storage standpoint. And then from a protocol standpoint, I would say, again, there's definitely a broad set of use cases, but I'll go into what those are. But our interest is how can we bootstrap an ecosystem that revolves a little bit more around data. So we're definitely not trying to compete with the more DeFi chains. It's very much trying to tackle a different type of problem. So we have people who are working on AI model monetization, and we have people working on like kind of similar to Story Protocol, like an IP licensing kind of protocol. We have people building like a ticketing protocol on Irys as well, like an event ticketing. So we have kind of a broad array. But when I think about the categories that we're focused on, I think AI is an interesting one, DeepIn's an interesting one, and then there's definitely like a longer tail of consumer use cases that we're kind of interested in.
Yeah, it's quite exciting. So talk to us a little bit about, where you see Irys in the next like 2 years to 3 years.
Yeah, that's a good question, and many ways I could take this. So I think goal number one is get to mainnet, and allow people to really use this thing permissionlessly at scale. And from there, I think our goal is how can we, one, bootstrap kind of large amounts of data onboarding to this network, and then two, how can we actually make this network more useful and have these almost extensions on the network? And I see every single protocol in Irys as some kind of extension to the network, where it's essentially creating this compounding value for the rest of the kind of the Irys economy. for lack of a better word. So that's where I really see Irys's network effects really kicking in, is once we have like a very strong ecosystem of protocols that revolve more broadly around, I would say, the data stack. And that does include like some parts of the compute stack, some parts of the like retrieval bandwidth stack, etc. So whether it's having like a DCDN on Irys and stuff like that. So that's kind of the broad way that I look at it. I always look at it as how can we cultivate an ecosystem that is kind of self-fulfilling and also very interconnected.
And then because you guys are, I would classify you guys more on the infrastructure space. One thing is we have a lot of builders that listen to the podcast. If you couldn't work on Irys, or what do you think you would want to be building? Or better put is like, do you think there are any areas of the Web3 ecosystem where you're like, I wish someone would build an app here? Because we're always looking for startup ideas for the listeners.
Interesting from a builder standpoint. I think there is an opportunity for aggregating a lot of deep in like I'd actually say DVIN protocols, to use the Carl Samani language, but they're kind of like the Irys, the compute protocols, et cetera, like the Akashas of the world. I see a pretty good opportunity if someone can aggregate a lot of these protocols and create this almost like AWS front end at a fraction of the cost. It's definitely a very complex problem to work on, but for me, I see the building blocks for like a decentralized infrastructure provider to like fully exist. I think it just needs like the right person with the product mind to like really build that out and build something that is actually really easy for developers to use. So I think that's something that I'm surprised has not actually been built in a way that's popular yet.
Yeah, it's quite funny. Like when I ask this question, I get a lot of I get a lot of responses for dashboards. That like it seems like dashboards is no, like legitimately.
Yeah.
I remember interviewing Bedrock, and they're like, "Yeah, if you could have a dashboard between like Babylon, Eigen, and here, and like this other protocol." I'm like, oh, okay, interesting.
That's actually a true idea. There'll be people who would pay for that as well. Like it's just a subscription. Like yeah, absolutely. Like people underestimate how much of a revenue generates for this kind of business as well.
Well, usually yeah, it's possible the revenue generation, but I always find with SaaS, like you're never going to get that much money out of it. You're likely, and obviously this is not the best, but if you look at like something like Revoke Cash, like you can, or Wallet Connect, they pretty much built their entire business off grants. Because if you do pure infrastructure layer, you can go to Optimism, get like 120K. You could go to Babylon, get like another 120.
Really, I'm surprised that Wallet Connect is still running on, but they just launched their token, right? I guess they're now running.
Yeah,
on
so I guess they're
now running on the token.
Yeah, they must be running on the token now. But this was like I must have interviewed them 3 months ago. They were all grants, and I remember talking with, I think it was Pedro as the founder, and he was like, "Yeah, we're just become so good at writing grants that we could pump them out in like a day." But talk to us a little bit about like some milestones you guys have coming up. Like, what can people look forward to from you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, big ones are public testnet and mainnet. And to double click a little bit there, the goal for public testnet is to one, show the world what we've built, start to really cultivate a builder ecosystem as well, a more permissionless builder ecosystem, because right now it's very curated, working with a few teams to help them fundraise and build interesting things that we think are interesting, etc. But public testnet, it's about expanding this to a wider set of developers. So we'll probably think about doing things like hackathons and stuff like that. So if you're a builder, those will be coming. And then for mainnet, it's really just about bringing all of the important players together to really kind of bootstrap this network. And whether that's miners, the builders should already be there, and all the other kind of infrastructure providers to like really build this decentralized network and start to cultivate it further. And then our goal from there, and in terms of how the community can get involved, it's really like our focus is to just, again, we kind of do two things. We build a bunch of products that are interesting for developers, and then we try to obviously help the developers and cultivate the ecosystem such that this ecosystem just kind of grows over time. And then that should translate to users having some interesting applications to use, whether it's some interesting data chain DeFi applications that are coming, or whether it's some social apps, etc. There should be a bunch of different things to play with for every kind of audience member, whether you're a builder, just a member of the community, or a miner, etc.
Now you mentioned social apps. What do you think about like the Farcasters, the Lens of the world? You feel like that's a use case that will be borne out, or you think it's still mostly like best product market fit for crypto, in my experience, has been like stable coins and limited DeFi.
Yeah, so I think social. I kind of flip flop between the two. I think it's going to take a long time for for social to become particularly popular, and I get my guess of what happens is that someone who is crypto forward happens to be a very good product person and makes the right design decision with one of the social networks, and suddenly it just blows up. Similar to how TikTok eventually just kind of blew up, Snapchat, just blew up. There'll be probably some kind of crypto forward founder who creates something that's actually cool and it blows up. Farcaster hasn't got to that point, and I'm not pushing Farcaster down anyway. It's just they haven't reached that kind of inflection point that other social platforms have reached, and it's just a very hard space to compete in more broadly. So it's very hard to predict. I don't blame them because it's just a really tough space. Like I wouldn't know where to start.
Yeah, it's a tough space. There's only been like, what do you think, like 7 really successful social platforms. And even some of the social platforms that are masquerading as social platforms aren't really social at all, like in any sense of the term. Like YouTube isn't social. Like you have.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't call that a social. When I think of social, there are really only about 4 that have survived the time, 4 or 5, maybe 5 or 6, but most have died pretty quickly. I think Facebook and some of these other ones have lasted a pretty long time relative to others, but yeah, it's a very tough space.
Yeah, it's a very tough space, and I'm not putting down Farcaster by any means. I'd love to have the founders on the podcast, but I just find it tough to use. Like I go on Warpcast, and I'm just like, all right, their channels. It's like Twitter had a baby with Reddit, and I'm just like, I don't know what to do here.
Yeah, it's definitely like that's kind of what I mean when I say you need to have the right features. I think when I think of any social network that really blew up, if you think about the Snapchats, the Instagrams, the TikToks, even Facebook as well back then, they all had at the time some very unique feature paired with good timing or good recommendation algorithms, whatever, and that's what initially blew up. So I think we need to see someone who is crypto forward come up with something very smart. That's definitely not going to be me, but definitely someone else out there will eventually get to that point. Probably definitely in the next decade. I just don't know when.
Yeah, I suspect. I also think it will likely not look like crypto on the front end. It would just be like crypto on the back end. That's what I think.
No way. Yeah, there's absolutely no way. I can't. The only thing I was thinking about is if there's kind of like no, not really any kind of token incentives. But the issue with that is that once it goes down, everyone gets really, really annoyed. Everyone gets really angry. So the issue with having any financial mechanisms is that as soon as anyone starts to lose any money in any way or had lots of money and lost it, it's not good. It's not good PR. I broadly agree that it's no way that they expose anything to the user.
Yeah, and if you think even just monetization on social platforms in general, there's some ad sharing revenue in Facebook and YouTube. The only thing, and just because I just listened to a thing on TikTok Shop, is like maybe there could be like some kind of like social purchasing feature that like crypto can enable, but all highly speculative. But that's what I think.
What do you mean? What do you mean by social purchasing? Like tokenizing content in some way, or
Yeah, essentially, like I actually think most of crypto will probably have to get away with having tokens in general, like tokenization, of course. Like let's say you have a financial security, and it's like, hey, yeah, in the past we had a QSIP for this, so like now we have like a transaction hash or like a token hash. That makes sense. But like the idea that people would start like trading AWS credits and GCP credits on like some secondary exchange, and they would be like fluctuating in value every single day. And then like GCP, Google Cloud for people that are uninitiated, that like Google Cloud would then be like shilling their token and be like, oh, like token, like people buy our token. Hold on. Like it feels just so ridiculous and so like clown world that like I think crypto eventually will have to get away from like every project has their own TGE event, but that's my own. It's my own problems with the space. Overall, very bullish. I run a giant podcast, guys.
Yeah. No, I agree. One thing is one thing that I'm interested in seeing is if there's ever going to be a public company that launches a token. I had a conversation with someone recently about would Base ever launch a token, and my argument now is there's no compliant way of doing so, because I don't think you'd be able to because your shareholders would sue you. Like you would get sued in some way by someone or by lots of people. But I wonder in some distant future if a Google, if a Facebook, if a Coinbase would be able to list a token along with equity in some way. Maybe the equity just gets tokenized.
Yeah, they would have to tokenize the equity in some. It creates this really weird cap table structure where you're like, okay, like the token holders don't really have equity, but like they have this token that like, what does it actually mean? Whereas if you actually were to liquidate a company, there's the different like liquidation points. It's like, hey, like the debt holders get like a higher priority than the equity holders. And it's like, well, what happens if there's a liquidation event of the company? What do the token holders get? They get nothing. So what is the token really?
Yeah, well, that is the stock market more broadly, and having shareholders is this very rigid structure, which I don't think there is a way to really represent that on chain. It would have to be you'd have to have some centralized governance structure or semi-centralized governance structure anyway. But it's an interesting thought experiment nonetheless.
Big problems, but we'll all address them, and that's why we're always building the future Web 3. But finally, talk to people where they can find you online, where they can interact with you and the company.
Yeah, so me, I'm on Twitter and Telegram. It's the same username. It's Josh_Benaron, which is my full name. And then Irys, it's IRYS_XYZ on X, and it's iris.xyz website, docs.iris.xyz, discord.iris.xyz. Everything with iris.xyz is where you'll find us, and I'm totally online. So feel free to reach out. Very happy to just answer questions or chat to builders who might be interested. I'm always around.
Absolutely. Well, hey, all the builders go get involved with Irys, and let's continue building the future Web 3.